Hello there, welcome to continuation of Creator Mass 2019, but this today is Double Plus Bonus Day, so this is the 14th day of Creator Mass where we make some products for IMVU. But what we're actually doing on this Double Plus Bonus Day is continuing on from where we were, where we left off a couple of days ago. Weight painting a ribbon wrap clothing item, and although the item itself is just a ribbon and it's relatively straightforward as a product to make, its simplicity and what it actually is makes it very tricky to weight paint to the character, because as we discussed in some of the previous videos, just hide that for the moment, hide. So the skeleton, the avatar, it articulates based on the size of the individual bones. So each bone controls a particular area, but the mesh itself, how it articulates, is defined by its structure. So that's all these black lines that you can see all over the place. And for a character or an avatar, as we're looking at, that structure is generally speaking going to be quite uniform, and it will follow a certain layout in order for it to accommodate the mesh to deform as we might expect it to. Where are the legs gone? So although the bones, individual bones, control certain areas of the mesh itself is what defines how the structure deforms based on, there we go, based on the mesh structure itself. So that's all these black lines. So as the armature articulates, the mesh changes to accommodate those differences, for that structure rather. So for formal structures that are relatively uniform, so looking at the avatar we can see that the structure basically mirrors itself. That means weight painting is going to be relatively straightforward because you're essentially matching up. So if we had a shirt or a vest over the top, our vest would be structured to basically follow the contours of the avatar. So that would then articulate with the avatar because it's a replication essentially of the avatar structure. But when you start doing stuff like this, in the words of Ghostbusters, you're crossing the streams. So when you do something that as an object, it's pretty simple. It's just an extruded plane, which is something that we went over in the last video. It's just an extruded plane. So a plane is added to the scene. So we add a plane up here and then we just extrude round the avatar and we get our product. And it's a very straightforward, simple product to actually make. But its structure means that you're essentially going across the avatar's internal structure. So if we, whoops, what did that do? So there is an avatar edge loop underneath that's like this, and our mesh basically goes right across that, and we've actually got edge loops that are not quite following that structure. It's a shame we can't use a different colour. And this means when you're weight painting, you're going to have to take your time, basically. Because you've got to try and match you've got to try and match your product. Come on, Selecty. There we go. Got to try and match your product as best as possible to the underlying structure, so when it deforms, pose mode, so when the skeleton deforms and it takes the avatar with it, it's going to properly articulate your mesh without doing, well, it's just a little bit here, but depending on the pose, you're going to get mesh clipping here, which is your product clipping itself, but we've also got a bit of mesh clipping into the avatar here. And this is one of the reasons why you see a lot of these types of products that loop around the avatars. While they're often a distance away from the avatar, they don't sit on the avatars as close-fitting or tight-fitting clothing, because to actually do that and get the item to sit correctly and deform properly when the avatar moves is actually quite tricky. It's doable, but it takes a lot of time to sort out. So this is 9. This is where we were last time. And one of the ways that we were working on this was to weight paint. Come on, Blender, wake up. Was to weight paint the two sides of the mesh, so we have a product that is basically two meshes with one inverted, so it's basically got a front and a back. But weight painting both of those at the same time is quite tricky if you use the actual weight paint system, because it means you have to paint on one side, turn the mesh around and paint the same value on the other side in order for the values to be accurate, and that can be very time consuming. But there's a quicker way of doing it. So for a product like this, put it into wireframe. For a product like this, the quick way to do it, switch out of, toggle out of perspective, so we're going into flat view and we want viewpoint front or side, it doesn't really matter which. Select your object, edit mode, activate X-ray so you can see through the mesh and we can still see the bones underneath. we've already got our groups set up, because essentially what we've done previously is just, let's switch out of edit mode for now. Rather than, so what you can do is, oh, we're still in, get rid of that. I won't do it now. Disable X-ray, then switch. There we go. So what you can do is select your bones and just paint an area. It doesn't matter how, it just a single vertex will be enough, because all you want to do at that point is establish the vertex group collection that's going to be needed for the particular item. And it doesn't matter if it's just a single vertex, because all we're doing at this point is just establishing the groups. Once you've got your groups, what you can then do is select the group in the vertex groups section, select it on the mesh, and then using the various selection tools, you can grab much larger areas of the mesh, or you can paint them, which is the selection circle, or weight circle paint. So you can paint vertices. Whoops. So let's say we were doing the right thigh, but we wanted to include all of these. You would then highlight the vertex group in the vertex group list, make your selection, so that's all of that, and then you click the assign button, and it assigns all of those selections to that group. So instead of going through the hassle of painting the outside and the inside of a mesh, so painting a green value there on that side and a green value on this side, what you can do is use this approach, go into wireframe, whoops, and just assign them manually, which can then be further refined later on when you've got more control over placement. So at the moment, the default weight is 1, so that's full influence over the selected. So if I select those, so those are assigned to that group. But in vertex weight paint mode, not all of those vertices are 100% controlled by that bone. So what you can do is use the edit mode approach to just set up the basic groups, and then use your weight paint mode to refine the values later on. And that just makes the whole process of weight painting far easier, or less time consuming, if you're using a double-sided mesh, which is what this is. Single-sided it doesn't matter so much, but double-sided it does. So if you have a vest that has a different, let's say, well, it's just a jacket. If you do a jacket that has fleece on the outside and sheepskin on the inside, that's a two-sided mesh because you'll have a different material on the outside as you do on the inside. So you have to weight paint both of those to the skeleton. If you do it using weight painting, that's going to be a very tedious job to do. But if you do it in edit mode, it's much easier to do. Because you can paint, I've still got it selected as well. Shortcut keys are best used for this. So it's shortcut key C, and you get a modifiable paint brush. If you have a middle mouse button, you left click to select, middle mouse will deselect. The tool itself right click cancels. The actual icon that's in the toolbar doesn't function the same way. It's just a single selection, so left click drag or shift click drag to select more. There's no deselect because they've separated the tool from the mouse, so that if you make a selection and move the scene around, you're not going to deselect something. Whereas if you do it with shortcut key, you will. So let's say we've selected all of that and we press the middle mouse button because we actually want to rotate the scene. What we're actually doing is deselecting. That's not what we want to do. So there's an advantage, disadvantage to the different approaches that you can use for that. So that was just a point of contention, shall we say, with using a double-sided mesh. What was a quick way of weight painting a mesh that's double-sided that didn't have you constantly having to flip and rotate the scene around backwards and forwards to paint the inside and outside values of an object. So using edit mode, you don't need to do that. So it took a day or so to get that sorted out. So now we have a mesh that articulates more or less correctly with the avatar. We still get some clipping depending on the extreme pose that the avatars might be in. So you want to try and weight your values as best as you can, that you reduce them, reduce the clipping and the distortion, but you're not going to eliminate it because of the style of the mesh, because, as we were talking about earlier, the structure of the mesh doesn't match up with the avatar, and so you're going to always get areas like this where we're clipping into the avatar. You could add more structure, but that doesn't matter so much. That won't necessarily solve the problem because it's the orientation. So we're going across essentially when the avatar's doing that. So we've got to a point where we might be able to export this. Where's the rosette? There's the rosette. Let's double check that. Whoops. So this does as well mean that it's likely that because there's aside from this being an AP product anyway, because it's not covering the avatar's body, you need to double check whether there's going to be any clipping in the MCG areas as well. And as we can see, we've got a bit of clipping because of what we were just talking about, where we're not following the structure of the avatar properly, because we're essentially making mesh structures that are going across the avatar. You could adjust the placement of these, the positions. Whoops. So we could move vertices to kind of get close to, but you're going to be adding more structure to do that. Right, so let's try exporting this. So we have to join everything together. Join. So we've got all our vertex groups, ribbon long. Just hide the wireframe for that. Right, so select the armature, then the mesh. I'll save the file before we do this. Save as 14. Double check we've got everything in place. So we've got a name. We've got our armature modifier, which is linking the mesh and the skeleton. Got our vertex groups. Don't need any shape keys. Well, we've got vertex colors, but UV map. Oh, that's one thing we haven't got, so let's double check that. Oh, right, of course, yes. So mesh, shade smooth. We don't need smooth groups on something like this because it's an organic shape that doesn't have any sharp edges. So that's okay. So there are two ways of doing smooth groups. Let me just drop the tutorial into smoothing. So there are basically two ways of sorting out smooth groups. You can either use normals, auto smooth, or you can drop a edge split modifier into the modifier stack, and that'll create hard edges where you need to defend, depending on whether they're defined by angle or being marked sharp. There's more information about that at the link also, and where are they? Starter files. for the starter files, just so that link is for the starter files. So let's export this. So select skeleton in the mesh, file, export, FBX, selected objects, we want that. Everything else is okay there. Geometry, apply modifiers, we can leave that. Armature, always disable. Add leaf bones. We don't need any animation, so disable. File name, location, export. Right, so that's exported it. So IMVU. Create. Derive new product. Female top. And go. So we want FBX import. Load FBX. Find the file. Open. We'll get the select skeleton root dialog. Always select the skeleton with fewer bones. So 87 in this instance, but it always starts with root node. Root node, 87 bones of one mesh. So select. That'll give us our ribbon. That's our mesh. Then click configure. Now we don't want this to override the default t-shirt. We want to keep that. So we want a mesh ID that's above 12, which are the defaults for the head, the legs, all the different parts of the body have a default mesh ID. We want something that's above that. So let's go with 89. It's got our two textures. Change the scale, 0.01. And then import. So it's going to overwrite some default materials. That's okay. Import. And there is our bow. Of course, with this being an AP item, you wouldn't have the shorts or the top on, but this allows the item to sit on top of. Ew, why is it doing that to the body? Oh, that's why. Right, so can we see what it's done to the torso? It's assigned our material to the torso, so we've overridden the default. Wanted to avoid that, so back in Blender, select the mesh, materials. We need to rename these. '82 and 81. So the point about that is to prevent the default material list goes up to, I think, 12 as well. So where is that? Hang on. There is a tutorial about material names. There we go. Material names. So if you are overriding a default, your material name has to be appended the same number, not necessarily the name, but the number of the material that's being overridden. So 2 is the, is it the skin? well, it's the skin part of the t-shirt, so it's overridden this neck area. We want to avoid that, so we have to use a completely different material number. So again, out of range, out of the default range, so we're not interfering. Select and then re-export. Do that again. That's okay, that's okay. Let's double check every time you export, because if you've opened a file or done something, it'll reset. Export. Create a new project. Top. Well, that's the default. Yeah, so it overrode this material slot. FBX import, load FBX 14, 87 bones, 89, 0.01, and our materials have come in okay, 81 and 82. And import, success, apply changes, and there is our bow. And there's the mesh ID that we used, 89. So what you would have to do now is, I don't have I don't have a thingamajiggery. So what you would do to test this is remove the t-shirt and the shorty shorts. So we enabled vertex colors. So let's see what that looks like. That looks a bit better. But obviously, whoops. Need to do a bit of testing to double check how the bow then clips through the mesh, because it will happen. So it's a question of how severe that clipping is, and whether that then means you have to make adjustments. So for example, without the shorts there, depending on the pose the avatar strikes, we've got some clipping here. Obviously this is shorts, but there might be some clipping with the leg. So that might mean going back into Blender and in edit mode. So we're always in edit mode when we make these additional changes. X-ray to select both sides of the mesh. So in edit mode, we're making changes to the mesh structure, but not, whoops, not the vertex groups. We've already got those sorted out, so we don't need to do anything to the vertex groups and the weight painting. All we're doing is shifting the structure of the mesh to accommodate any clipping that might occur. So just reset that. And if you have X-ray enabled for double-sided meshes, that allows you to click select through the mesh. So with it being double-sided, there are actually two vertices at this location, not one. So if you just click, you're toggle selecting either or vertex, but with X-ray enabled, because we can see through the mesh, we can shift click and select both of them instead of just the one. So that's what you then need to do, is export it and load it into IMVU as a product, and then whoops, test to see where it, how well it deforms, if it intersects with the mesh, and that is essentially a clothing item. So all of this discussion throughout the 2 or 3 videos that we've done recently, and the, what did we do before? We did another item before. They're all basically clothing items. It's just that, you know, they're not shirts, but they're clothing items because they use the clothing rig. Save that. Save as 1415. So that is the ribbon, the Saucy ribbon completed and into IMVU. So this will be, the source files for this will be uploaded. They'll be available for use, including the textures. But that's it. That's the project. That was the project that we started a couple of days ago. And the weight painting is the thing that's the time-consuming element of it. It takes a lot of time to get those right, not just to define the bone influence, but as we were saying at the beginning, what you're actually more concerned with is not so much the influence, but whether the thing articulates and deforms in a way that follows as close as possible the mesh, the avatar mesh. Oh, and one point of clarification. Doing this is not weight painting to multiple bones. All that's done is selected multiple bones, but as you note, the vertex group that's selected changes depending on the bone that's selected last, because what's actually happening is the active bone, so that's the one that's highlighted a pale blue rather than the darker blue, that's the active bone. So Blender is selecting the vertex group that's associated with that active bone. So if you watch what's happening in the vertex list, vertex group list, it changes depending on which bone is active, even though there are multiple bones selected. Only one vertex group can be painted to at any one time. That's just a point of clarity, because it may have appeared as though multiple bones being selected, there were multiple vertex groups being painted to. That is not the case. It's just one group, one bone, and it's the one that's highlighted as the active bone. So basically then, here endeth Creator Mask for 2019, Creator Mask 2019 where we make some IMVU products on a Christmas theme. Oops, save that. Save as. Oh, that's the baby tee. Oh, that's the t-shirt. I was going to say, why have we got two meshes there? But that's because the t-shirt's there. Save as. We can get rid of that though, or can we? No, you have to derive from the empty derivable for that. Oh, and also when you're doing products, clothing in particular, you can't really use the compatible body pattern, so we can't type 191 to add the male body part because this won't, it's not built to fit. So you could add it, but it's going to clip. So there is our project completed. Right, so we shall call it quits there because there's not much else to go over. The vertex groups and clarification on that was mainly the point of this particular stream, but there may be other streams in future. Just got to find out, just got to get those sorted out, organized. Right, so thanks for watching. Those of you who have stuck through all the videos that we've been doing and watched the projects as they have developed. And we shall see you on the next video, whenever that is. Right, bye for now, everyone. Hello again. That was a fib. It just occurred to me that there's something we can try here. So hello again. this product, as it currently is, includes a t-shirt, and we actually want to get rid of that. So what we have to do for this particular type of ribbon project, we have to get rid of the t-shirt, otherwise the t-shirt is included with the product. Not being a clothing maker, these things a bit slow on the pickup. So what we actually have to do with this then is, we were kind of right the first time, so we want to override material 0. So one of these materials is to be 0. And we can leave the other one as 82, it doesn't really matter. So if we re-export this, da-di-da-di-da, that's okay, 14 FBX. So what we need to do is re-export this, import this as mesh ID 2 so that we override the t-shirt, because we don't want the t-shirt included with the mesh. So top, but we want this to be a clothing item. So FBX import, load FBX, 14. What did that do? Oh, that's why. Do that again. FBX 14, la-di-da-di-da, that's okay. Cancel. Do that again. 14. There we go. Okay. So we actually want this to be mesh ID 2, which is the upper body. But then that means you've got to include that. Then means, well, let's see what it does. Not being a clothing maker, I'm not too 100% sure about all of this. So 0.01 from the point of view of what you do with the products in IMVU. So import, because that will gets rid of the t-shirt, but we then have to re-enable so that's why I see. So that's why people derive from the empty clothing item thing then. So let's try that. Empty derivable female clothing. FBX import, load FBX 14. .01. This needs to be 2, upper body. Okay. Right, so we should have in the config that's not right either. So how do people do that then? Do we have to include the mesh parts of the avatar? So we've got rid of the t-shirt, but the t-shirt has that's the MCG. So you must need to include sections of the avatar, which seems a bit wasteful. So let's try that. Skeleton, upper, lower. So just make sure that the right, so upper, lower, and our mesh. Export. Selected objects, geometry, armature, export. Drive new product. Let's go with enter drivable again. Load FBX 14. Yeah. Where's our sections gone? Okay, so it looks like so to export multiple mesh objects, it looks like you have to make sure you'd have to do something similar to the the accessory file export, which means nothing should be selected. Export 15. Deselect selected objects. That forces Blender to export everything that's in the scene. The other ones are okay, and then just export again. So that should no, it's only bringing the one in. It's a little odd because we should have the upper torso and lower as items listed as part of the meshes as the mesh. So I'm not sure what's going on there. Yeah, I see. So let's try joining them together. Oh no, we can't even do that either. join the top. So this is where clothing becomes quite tricky, depending on what it is that you're doing, because if you have any skin that's going to be visible, that also explains possibly why just double check before we do that. So which is the t-shirt? I have to come back to this. Because clothing doesn't always do what you expect it to, because the shorts don't sit on top of the avatar. The avatar's torso, or the bits that we can see, are part of the shorts. So for something like this to work, that would mean you have to join well, either join or export separately, but then that's the same mesh ID as your product. So do you... I wonder if you can export multiple meshes without selecting the skeleton. Selected objects, export. Let's just create a new project. Import. Let's see what this does. Nice, it's only bringing in, for whatever reason, it's only bringing in. It's not even named right either. Let's save this. Save as. Close. So these are the trials and tribulations of working with clothing for IMVU. Selected objects. Modifiers, that's okay. Disable, disable. So Oh, there we go. Pelvis, naked top. So we could use upper body for the naked top. And then we can state our, let's try 89, doesn't matter. Skin 7, that's fine, 0.01. Let's try that. Okay. Okay, that's weird. That's kind of funny actually. The ribbon, even though the avatar is correctly weight painted to the skeleton, it still hasn't, it's not come through with the weight paint values assigned. The bottoms have, but the top hasn't. Or that's partially assigned. That's really odd. The only other way I can think to do this would be to export the individual components separately and just load in several FBX files into the same project. So let's try that. Skeleton, top, export. Selected objects, geometry, that's okay. Skeleton, bottom. And then skeleton, rosette, ribbon. Export. So let's try this again. So let's try the empty derivable. So, FBX import, bottom, five, 0.01, import, right, so that works. So we want the skin for that. Naked skin. So there's the naked skin. FBX import. We want the top. Female naked top. 0.01. So the ID for this should be 2, which is the upper body. Skin. Apply scale 0.01. Import. That's okay. Apply changes. So it's reset the textures again. Whoops, we've got some wonky deformation there. That's quite ugly. But import, load, ribbon. $89 for this. Oh, we might need to change the material name. Just import that, see what that does. Yeah, so we've got a bit of clipping. So yes, that's how you do it then. Not being a clothing maker, I'm not overly familiar with this aspect of clothing, as in the import and construction and how you assemble the product in IMVU. But for something like this, this is what you would have to do. So you are, oh, and yeah, so we've got a bit of clipping, so we'd have to go back into Blender and make adjustments to the mesh as we were doing before in edit mode. Move the vertices outwards a little bit, then re-export. But that's how you do this particular type of product, is you have to include the avatar parts that you are wanting to essentially hide. Not hide. The avatar parts that you want to display have to be included as part of the project, but you don't necessarily need to include them all in the same file. That's quite ugly. I think that's because yeah, that is going to be because of the IMVU is converting all of this stuff into quads, and it's not doing it as effectively as it should do. They're not quads, into triangles, because it's in the clothing file uses quads faces to make it easier to edit. Make it easier to edit the mesh if necessary, and or see the structure of the avatar, see how it's all, because in triangles that's actually quite difficult to discern. So it's been converted to quads using what's there. Nothing's been added to make that easier. But for certain types of product, that means that you have to include parts of the avatar mesh, which then means you're going to run the risk of some distortion, because the weight painting values that we have in Blender have to be done manually. Ooh, that's quite ugly. We don't have a skin modifier that we can just drag and drop onto our avatars. See, that shouldn't collapse. That shouldn't collapse like that. There should be a face there, and the same at the top there. That shouldn't do that. May have to adjust that. Yeah, so in Blender we have to manually assign all the weight values that distort the mesh, and it's quite tricky to get those to match up to what IMVU is expecting using a 3D Studio Max file. But by the by, that is how we create these sorts of products, is that, yeah, so we have to include the body part, whoops, body part as part of the project. They don't necessarily make it easy to do. Save as 17. So let's collapse all of that. So let's make that triangles and see if that helps. So select skeleton. Want to export that as top. Top. We can import the file again over the top of the one that we've just got. In fact, actually, no, let's create a new project. So we have a comparison, empty derivable, FBX import, import 16 top. .01. So it's going to override the skin, mesh ID, upper body, and then import. Slide changes. Yeah, that's much better. It's just because IMVU or the FBX file. Oh no, it's not. That's still got that. I'll need to take a look at the starter files and make some adjustments to those, because that's what's going on there. Because we can't see it does collapse, but not nearly as much on the actual avatar. So that's going to be so that pose is okay. It's just when it does that. Come on, switch pose. Yeah, it's just when it does that, so it's collapsing. So what pose is that? Hands behind the back. Oh, it does collapse, but not quite as much. Well, that's going to be something that might have to live with, I guess. I don't know. Need a wireframe overlay so that we can see what's causing that, or where that actually is. Because Ouch, I bet that hurts. So it's underneath. Whoops. So it looks like these two faces, and then maybe these two. You know what we could really do with is just a button that we press that toggles us through the different poses. Right, so it's this forearm, so it's this. Looks like it's this edge. Let's hide the skeleton for now. So there's that one on that side, and that one on the other side. So rotate both of those. Did that rotate? Yeah. And then maybe it's this one under here. This is all guesswork because we don't have a wireframe overlay. It looks like in fact it could just be that. Let's try exporting that. Skeleton mesh, export FBX, 16 top. New project, empty derivable. Import FBX, load FBX and top. There it is. Mesh ID 2, skin, that's okay, import. What changes? No, that's not fixed it. Well, it's fixed part of it, but not all of it. So this, what you are witnessing right now, this is what it was like right at the very beginning, where there were no tools for Blender, nothing. So everything had to be built, rigged, exported, tested, checked, rebuilt, rejigged. So iterations of that ad infinitum in order to get what we now have with our skeletons, with everything working the way that more or less where it should. So it's that could so do with a wireframe overlay. So let's get this into a more agreeable position that's reflective of the avatar. So we can actually see more clearly what we are working with. And yes, unfortunately we cannot use this file for poses, because look how easy it is to pose the avatar. It's ridiculous. Right, so hide that so we can see what we're looking at. So it's not I think I'm going to have to come back to this because that's going to be quite time consuming. But suffice to say, to make our clothing products, what we're doing is, depending on the type of clothing, if any skin is visible from the item, we have to include that part of the avatar with the product. So for an item like this that is a full avatar outfit, for want of a better way of putting it, we have to include both the top and the bottom of the mesh for it to work. So we export those separately. Skeleton, mesh, we export top, skeleton, mesh, export the bottom, and then skeleton, mesh, your actual clothing item. And then just import those separately. Which one is it? Import those separately. Whoops. It's that one. Yeah, it's that one. Import those separately so that they come in. And that would then be your product. So your actual product is going to be that. So when someone is purchasing whatever it is that you've made, essentially for this particular product, that's what they're buying, is the ribbon plus the avatar bits that make the product work in this context as an AP item. So then obviously you upload that and it becomes an AP item. What's 8? That's one of the feet. So that's another consideration for clothing, actually. So it's not just that you have to make sure your product fits the avatar and deforms with it, but also you're including, or what bits of the avatar you have to include with your product in order for it to work in IMVU. Otherwise you end up with missing parts like that. Oh, well, not like that. Where's the other one that's got missing bits? Oh, we did have one. Must have got rid of it. But that's clothing. So it's not quite as straightforward as we might like it to be, but it is more than doable with a bit of lateral thinking. Right. So on that note, we can now say that we have completed the project. Phew. With that added bit of complication. So yes, the project files will be available. I'll double check the avatar files, the meshes, so that make sure that they don't deform quite as poorly as that. So it is quite possible to make clothing. Right, on that note then, thank you for lurking. And that here ends Creator Mars 2019, where we make some IMVU products. So yes, so we're going to go for now. We're going to go for real now. So thanks for watching everyone, and we'll see you soon. Bye.